Mother Knows Death presents External Exams with Nicole and Jemmy.
On today's external exam, we will be speaking with a veteran news journalist who specializes in true crime. Her coverage of stories such as the Idaho college student murders, the Long Island serial killer, and the Scott Peterson trial and conviction have earned her an Edward R. Murrow Award. Today, we will discuss her career as a true crime journalist and talk about some of the infamous cases she has covered. Please welcome Laura Ingle to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. It's so crazy to be talking to you right now because I feel like I know you. You've been covering these cases my entire adult life.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I've covered a lot. When I go back in my Rolodex of true crime, sometimes I go, wow, that was so long ago. But to me, it feels like it was just yesterday in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was in my 20s. I was in my early 20s when the whole Scott Peterson thing happened. And just being here talking with you today is just, it's just crazy because like I said, I've seen you reporting on all these and I just feel like I know you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Your job is really cool, and I always like to talk about careers that women especially can get in this field, especially if they don't like doing something as gruesome as my job, for example. So how did you get into this field? I know you got your start in radio, but how old were you when you started working in radio?
I too was in my early 20s, and I came into this world of news reporting through, of all things, rock and roll. I was a rock DJ at a radio station in my hometown of Sacramento, California, and that's really where I got my start. And it's a really long story. I won't go into too much of it, but I really only wanted to work at this radio station because I wanted to be in the building with my favorite DJs, and all the rock stars would come through, and I would listen in my Mustang to all the interviews, and I thought it was so cool, and I really just wanted to answer the phones and take out the garbage. And I ended up getting a job working as a sales assistant because the one skill I had, I could type. I can type fast, and I encourage anybody in high school to take that course because it will pay off. It was one of the most important things that I ever took in school. But I got this job as a sales assistant one day after work, and I was putting together sales pitches for the sales team members I was working with, and somebody needed a voice on a commercial. It was for Super Shops, this tire store. And I went in and I laid down the track, and somebody turned to me and they said, "Oh, you should maybe do some radio." And that's how it really started for me. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up working overnights and then weekends. And then I got a full-time job being a DJ at this rock radio station. And I was the night jock, which meant I got to interview all of the cool rock stars that were coming through to do shows in Sacramento. And my first interview was with White Zombie. And then off we went. So I did that for a really long time until, as anybody who works in radio knows, someday a new program director will come in and they'll clean out shop. They'll switch things up. They'll bring in their own people. And that's what happened to me. And I was ushered out of that radio station and thought, oh my gosh, my life is over. This is all I know. And but then I remembered that my grandmother had always had this transistor radio on top of her washing machine, and she listened to news radio. And I always found it really fascinating. And so I started making calls and kind of did the same routine of calling and calling and calling to see if I could get a job, answering the phones, taking out the trash, really taking a step back because I had a really big job on the rock side of radio, and I had to start all over and reinvent myself for news radio, which is what I did.
I think a really important story of anyone that's really successful is you always hear that there was a point that they went home and cried and said, "Oh my God, my life is over and everything I worked for is done." And it's just encouraging to hear because it always gets better,
Yeah. Yeah. In the moment, I just thought everything, I really did. I thought, what am I going to do? This is all I know how to do. This is all I want to do. And I just couldn't see past it in those first initial days and weeks. But then you just really have to kind of quiet your mind and think, okay, how can I apply this skill set maybe in another way? And at that time for music radio, they had just started, a lot of radio stations had just started doing automation, which was, I actually got a quick job at another radio station where I did 5 hours of radio in 5 minutes. So I just read the in and outs in between the songs. They put it together and they said, bye. And I said, wait, how big is the paycheck going to be? And so that really worried me. And that's what really turned me on to news, because I thought, well, there's always going to be a need for news. That's live and immediate. So I just had to change my sights to that. And I was very interested in that anyway.
And how long did you end up working in radio?
Oh boy. How long did I end up working in radio? I would say 15, 17 years. I mean, I'm still doing radio today.
Yeah, technically podcasts too, or kind
Yeah.
of radio.
So yeah, I've done a couple of podcasts on my own, and I'm going to be doing one here this year as well. Stay tuned. But yeah, since I was in my early 20s, it's really always been a medium that I have connected with. My dad always had the radio on in the car, and so did my mom. And so it was just one of those things. It's relatable. It's a relatable format, and it's something that you can take anywhere. Nowadays, of course, it's different. You really can take it anywhere, but I just always loved it. And I loved the theater of the mind. And that was what really drew me to news radio in the very beginning, because my first story were the floods of 1997 in Sacramento, my hometown. The levees broke, and all of our very skilled and very experienced news reporters went out to all these different areas. So imagine a major metropolitan area going underwater very quickly. A lot of parts were going underwater. It was a huge problem. So we had, Cammie Lloyd going to the Office of Emergency Services. We had Kevin Burke going to the state capitol. So everybody was being dispatched to these really important places. And this phone call came into the newsroom. I was literally the last person standing. This phone call came in and they said, we've got livestock drowning in the fields. Sacramento's a cow town. My family actually has a cattle ranch. And they said, what are we going to do? I mean, this is not just a couple of cows. This is a lot of livestock, horses and cows that were getting stuck in the mud. And I remember my news director turned around. At this point, I was only really qualified to answer the phones. And he turned around and he's like, does anybody know anybody? I said, actually, I know somebody. And he looked at me. He goes, yeah, but you're a rock DJ. I said, listen, it's the same thing, right? When I was a rock DJ, I would go to a show. I would interview rock stars backstage. I would tell people what was going on. It's the same thing, just with different players, right? He's like, I guess. Go ahead. So he gave me a flip phone and a tape recorder, and off I went. I called my uncle. He threw me on a tractor, and we went into the middle of a big muddy field with the gnat sound of distressed cattle everywhere. I didn't even need to use the tape deck, and I just opened up the phone and I started talking to the farmers and the ranchers, and just talking to them and holding up the phone. And when I got back into the newsroom, absolutely covered in mud, I wore white shoes that day, my Converse, it was a disaster. And I got back into the newsroom, and he looked at me and he goes, okay, all right, so you're a reporter now. And that's how it started.
Oh God, I love that so much. It's like having this confidence in yourself that you just know that you're going to do a good job, and you have to convince someone that you're at that level is awesome.
Well, and my other little mantra in my head I had at the time is, somebody's got to do it. It may as well be me, because I've learned from watching in newsrooms and in rock radio stations that, somebody else is going to step up to the plate. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes to put your foot forward and raise your hand and say, wait, I think I can do this. Because all they can say is no. And all you can do is fail and then try again and learn from it.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. Like, just not taking any kind of risk doesn't get you anywhere. And you always have to expect to be told no, but take the chance because it, like, just that one chance for you changed your whole entire course of your life, It
did. It really did. I mean, and I thank that news director who I'm still in touch with today. We tell this story often about, just this crazy way it all started. And had it not been for that moment, had it not been for those cows, who I can say most of them were successfully removed from the mud, um, with tractors and chains, had it not been for that moment, I really don't know. I might still be answering phones somewhere.
It's interesting because everybody has either listened to radio or even just watched the news, and you just see these people on there all the time, and it looks very natural, but it's actually very hard to get whatever you're thinking in your head out of your mouth in such a
Yes.
way that you don't stutter, you don't say like a million times. I'm guilty of that, of course. But just being clear and concise all the time. It doesn't come naturally to everyone, and you just make it look like so easy, you know?
Oh, that is so nice of you. Well, I think the life experiences that we all have lead us to where we are and give us that little bit of history within ourselves and our own encyclopedia and Rolodex of what we can do, who we know, how we use that information. And even, being able to talk to you is such a treat for me, and to share that story, because to me, sometimes when people ask me, I think, you don't have time to listen to this long drawn out story. And is it really even interesting to you? But then I find out that it is interesting, and I love being able to share it. And sometimes people will ask me if I'll talk to, I don't actually do a lot of, I don't go to high schools or colleges, but I'm always happy to talk to people. And if anybody ever wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to be a sounding board, because there is so much rejection in this business that I've even just experienced in the last year. I'm doing better this year, but last year was a tough year for me. And you just have to get back up, and it can take you a minute. And it's okay to be wounded, and it's okay to feel that rejection, because hopefully it will propel you to get back up and be better in the next round in the match.
I agree with that. And you just have to know, being a human, that there's going to be really hard days
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sometimes hard years. Like,
That's right. It's not perfect. And, I have an 11-year-old, and he never says anything like life isn't fair. But I told him before, like, nobody ever said life is going to be fair. And we just have to find a way to navigate through it all. And some days are better than others. I remember I've done a lot of really hard to report stories, and I've done some really fun ones. And there was one block of time where I got to do this really cool story, which I could tell you about later, but I got to do this really cool story. And then the next day I had to go stand at a gas station in New Jersey on the turnpike with garbage around my feet and rats running around. And I looked at my cameraman. I'm like, how did this just happen? We were just doing this really cool thing. He goes, look, not every day is going to be that day. You got to have these gas station days to be able to do the other cool stuff too.
yeah, that's kind of amazing, actually. You're just like, how did I end up here right now? Like, why is this my life today?
Yes. Yes.
So you're working in radio all these years, and then you decide that you're going to start doing TV. Like, how did that transition occur?
A happy accident, a happy circumstance, I would say, in a dreadful story that I was covering in radio. So I mentioned that I was from Sacramento. So I did 93 Rock, KRXQ. Then I did KFBK, which is the big powerhouse news radio station. And then I ended up moving to Los Angeles and working at KFI AM 640, which is a monster radio station. And one I'm proud that I've worked at all of these radio stations. So I was working at KFI, and I was covering an awful story in San Diego. And it was one of the first big trials that I covered for KFI, the David Westerfield trial. And he was a man who was accused of kidnapping his 6-year-old neighbor out of her house while her parents were partying in the garage. Upscale, nice, beautiful neighborhood. Did really bad things to her and left her out in the desert. So I was covering that story, and I was asked to go down there. My car had been breaking down, living in Los Angeles. Driving to San Diego is a far drive. If anybody's done it, you know how hard that is and how hot it is. And I was in Los Angeles, and I had told my boss, I said, my car is not going to make it back and forth, and my Jeep is not making it. And he said, well, I can't really give you one of our news cars, which are the cars with all the bells and whistles. He said, but our sister station has a vehicle that I think that we could probably let you use because it's off season. I said, what is it? He goes, well, it's our sports station that does the Dodgers. I said, oh, that's cool. That's great. So he hands me the keys and I go out, and it is a VW Bug that is painted like a baseball.
Oh my God.
So I drive a baseball down to a murder trial in San Diego, which is a devastating story to tell, but here I am in a baseball. So I drive down and I'm doing my radio thing. And when we do radio in the car, I've got the headset on, I've got my tape decks that are plugged into the phones, and I'm talking about being in the courtroom and what I'm observing and all of the different forensics. There was a lot of bug evidence in that case. And I was talking about, the nuances of watching the victim's family, looking at the defendant, talking about the attorneys and the wild people that they were calling to the stand. And I got a knock on my baseball car door, and it was somebody from Fox News. It was a producer who had been listening to me on that long drive back and forth and said, hey, we found you because somebody said they're the radio reporters in the baseball. We want you to come on our show today. And it was with Shepard Smith. And I said, oh, well, I do radio. And they said, well, it's fine. You just come, you'll sit down, you'll do 15 minutes. It'll be great. And I said, okay. And of course I'm radio. So I'm in, a t-shirt and shorts, my hair's in a ponytail. And my friend that was working at Court TV in the satellite truck next to me looked at me. He said, you got to go to the mall. You got to go across the street. Like you can't do this. And I said, okay. So I ran across the street to Ann Taylor. I bought a blazer. And he said, let me have my person put some makeup on your face. Let's do this. So I did some makeup. I was so nervous. I went out and I talked on television about the trial that I was covering. And I was so relieved when it was over. I took that thing called an IFB, which I'd never used before, out of my ear. I was like, phew, I'm going back to my baseball. And then I turned and they said, same time tomorrow? And I said, no, I only have the one blazer. That's all I got. This isn't going to work out. But I started doing that. And then the same sort of thing happened when we wrapped up that trial. And then the Scott Peterson case happened. And when Scott Peterson was first arrested, we had the preliminary hearing in Modesto before the trial was moved to Redwood City. And I was in the back of a van that we had made into a radio station, my engineer and I had the side panel open, and news anchor Greta Van Susteren, who I'm still friends with and forever indebted to today, was watching me, and she was standing there in her suit and her chain, and she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm broadcasting. And she just stood there and she listened to me, and same thing. She said, I want you on my show. You've been in the courtroom. I need the eyes and ears. Can you join our show? And so I'm thinking, do I still have the blazer? So I go out and I sat on the director's chair. And then that is really what started it all for me. Greta took me under her wing. She wanted me on her show every night, and I became part of her panel. And that is how I got into television.
That's such a cool story. Did you feel, just because you're so used to not having to make eye contact with the camera and knowing that they're looking at your face, talking and everything, was that weird for you to get used to at first?
Yes, it was. But I mean, I was so comfortable with Greta and Claudia Cowan, the reporter that was there, and the lawyers that I had been side by side working with. And really, because it was not directly talking to camera, it was having a conversation. You just think of the camera being an extra person at the cocktail party. Like, I'm talking to Greta, but I want to talk to you. I want to bring you into the conversation. I keep talking to Greta, and I might look back at the person at the cocktail party, which is the camera. That's how I always used to kind of phrase it when I was doing a panel. And, I was very nervous for sure. I mean, those first few weeks, I'd never done it before. And here it was the biggest story. You were watching it. I mean, it was the biggest story, not only in the United States, in the world. I mean, we had people watching it all over the planet. We knew that once the verdict came, which was obviously much later, but we had images from military bases around the world that were glued to this case. So it was a very, very big deal, and a great opportunity for me to be able to, use this medium. And really, when it all started, and I want to say this about the victims that we talk about and cover, when I first went to Modesto to cover the story in the first place, it was because I wanted to help. And that's something that we can do as reporters and anchors and podcasters is, spread the word, get the information out, get the pictures out. That's what I wanted to do in that case and then I felt being a part of Greta's panel and being a part of that channel at the time was a way that I could help do that.
Yeah, and you've covered such amazing news stories, not amazing, but also infamous murder cases throughout my entire life, like Hurricane Katrina, Michael Jackson molestation case, Lacey Peterson, as you've been talking about, Long Island serial killer, Idaho murders, Gabby Petito. And yeah, sometimes you're there before, like with Lacey Peterson, for example, you were reporting on her while she was missing before her body was even found. So your reporting really could have helped find her body, and it's the same with Gabby Petito too, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I went down to up to Modesto from Los Angeles, and being from Sacramento, Modesto is a very short drive. And I'd asked my news director, I said, please let me go. There's a missing woman. It's Christmas. I know this area. This is not your average missing person case. And we actually got in a pretty big fight about it. And he said, listen, the only reason that you care about this case is because you're from Sacramento. It's going to die down. It's going to be, I said, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. You have to let me go. And we got into such a scrap about it. I said, I'll tell you what, I quit. I will quit just for now. I will pause my employment here. I will go to Modesto and I will cover the story as a stringer, meaning I'll string it out to other radio stations and people who want the story. And then when I'm done, I'll come back. How about that? And I'll string for you. I'll string for KFI. And he's like, you can go, fine, just go for a little bit and we'll see what happens. But that was the mission, because she actually reminded me of my best friend who was pregnant at the time, who had another big, beautiful smile and beautiful husband. And like, none of it made sense. And it's, how could this be? And there's, and we've talked to Gabby Petito's parents about this. There's so many, and they are doing such an amazing job of shining the light on other cases, because you get the story that the media fixates on. And people say, well, why was it Lacey Peterson? It was, for all the reasons that we've talked about. Yes, of course she was beautiful, but it was Christmas. She was 8.5 months pregnant. Her husband was, good looking. Alibi didn't make sense. Like, there was a lot of reasons why just it worked that way. But in taking that kind of story coverage and then putting it, trying to give some of that light to others, many people are very aware of that, myself included, that type of coverage needs to go to other places as well. So it's something that we can do in the press, get those numbers out, get those pictures out, and try and help the best we can.
Out of all these stories that you've covered over the years, was there any that you felt a particular like passion? I mean, obviously the Scott Peterson case you just mentioned. Were there any other ones, or even that one? Like, what was it about them that just made you so connected to a particular story?
Well, the Scott Peterson one I mentioned, and that I call that one my 20-year story, because I've been covering Scott Peterson since the day Lacey Peterson went missing. I am still covering Peterson today. On July 15th, I will be back. I'm going home to see my family in Sacramento, as I do in every July, and I'm going to drive down to Redwood City, and I will be at his hearing, which is one of the last 3 big hearings he has with the LA Innocence Project. I will be back covering that case. It is a case that I will cover for the rest of my life. That I know. The other stories that I have covered in great detail, the Long Island serial killer, which I'm deeply involved with right now, is a big one. But going back, the Yosemite murders was a big one for me. That was Cary Stayner. And if you remember, he was the handsome handyman at the motel at the Cedar Lodge near the entrance of Yosemite. And there was a mom, her daughter, and her daughter's best friend that were having, a beautiful summer and a beautiful trip together when tragedy struck and their bodies were found. And that was one that I covered extensively, going back to Yosemite to cover it while the investigation was ongoing. And that one was super creepy because, as it turned out, Cary Stayner, who was the hotel handyman at the place where the girls were staying, had taken their wallets and driven to, of all places, Modesto, and thrown their wallets out the door, out the window at a traffic stop in an area that was known to be just completely involved with meth activity, meth heads. And I remember calling the FBI saying, I want to go cover this case, but I'm a little, what happened to these women was horrific. And he said, look, they're going to be, we know who they are. It's meth heads. Don't worry about it. So off I went to the Cedar Lodge, and I stayed there while Carrie Stainer was still working there, and was roaming around the parking lot with my tape recorder as a radio reporter, talking to people. Do you feel safe? And how has this affected you in your travel, and how you keep your family, safe? And how do you manage this part of the trip now that this horrible Yosemite story has happened? So Carrie Stainer was still there. We saw him in the parking lot. I mean, that was a crazy story. And that trial and the sentencing, that legal part was very hard. And also the Connecticut home invasion case was another big case that I covered. And that was another story that has really stayed with me. People have asked me before, like, what story keeps you up at night? What is it that you can't unsee? The Connecticut home invasion case of the Pettit family is one that has been very, very hard for me to unsee pictures of what happened inside of that house. And Lacey Peterson autopsy photos that were shown in court, I also can't unsee that.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I was going to ask you, is because regular people that watch you on the news, they hear these stories, but they don't get to see all of the information that comes with a case. And you get special access to not only more of the story, but crime scene photos and autopsy photos. And I know that even a person that's used to seeing them all the time, there's still some stuff that I see that I'm like, oh my God, that's really graphic or gruesome. I can't believe somebody did that to another person. So you're saying the Lacey Peterson one really, really bothered you. And well, I'm not 100% familiar with the Connecticut home invasion story. What was it about that was so disturbing?
The Connecticut home invasion, and yes, and just to put a pin on the Lacey Peterson story, that was very difficult because I was so deeply invested in that story, and because I was sitting behind her mother and her family members, her stepfather, her dad, her sister, her brother, and to watch them. They actually left the room when the autopsy photos were shown in court, but the rest of us saw it. And it was horrific. She was in the water for 3 months. And as we know, she was missing her head and her hands and her feet. And so it was a pretty gruesome thing. That the jurors, I mean, these are people that are chosen, and they get the jury summons, and, they're affected for the rest of their lives. I said that when I was covering the Trump trial, that when you're a juror, you are that juror for the rest of your life. This is the information that you've absorbed and obtained and that you think about. The Connecticut home invasion case was a story about a mother and her 2 daughters who had gone grocery shopping, and they had gone back to their affluent neighborhood and home, but they had been cased by these 2 bad guys, Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komerzejewski, and they followed the girls home, and they're like, oh, that's a good looking house. Yeah, we're going to hit that house. And so they hit the house. The dad, Dr. Pettit, who survived the attack, was in the basement watching TV. They broke in through an open door or window. They broke in through the basement, and they got in, and they beat Dr. Pettit within an inch of his life, tied him up, went upstairs and tied the 2 daughters, the young daughters, up to their beds, and did bad things to everybody, and took the mom to the bank, made her withdraw cash. They said, we'll let everybody go. They got back to the house, and the mom, Mrs. Pettit, did alert the bank and was terrified and said, I need you to know what's going on. The police eventually came to the house, and the 2 bad guys panicked, and they lit the house on fire with everybody tied up. And the cops didn't go in right away, and they were waiting for somebody that was higher up to come in and charge the house. And they waited too long, and they died. And so, and that was those inside scenes of that home, and knowing what happened, and being, knowing what happened with law enforcement. There were a lot of people that tried to do the right thing, and it happens, but man, that was a really, really tough case. And Joshua Komerzejewski, one of the suspects, now convicted killer, I went to both trials. It was 2 trials for 2 men. I went to both trials. Then I went to both sentencing hearings. It was all really long. It took a really long time to get through it all. But one of the things that the suspects did is it was revealed he had a diary. And so I actually, I I wish I had had an assistant or somebody, but I went through and I typed with those typing skills. I went through and I transcribed every single thing that he wrote in his diary about before the case, about how he would stalk victims, how he would pick his homes that he was going to break into. He was primarily a burglar. And so I went through because it was like this guide. And so I forever tell people to close their shades at night, because what he would do is go around the neighborhoods and he said, everybody has their drapes open. It's like window shopping. I get to go around and see what people have in their homes. And I watch them press their codes to their alarms. And, I immediately felt like I had to write that down and put that out into the world. So I transcribed his diary as a warning to the public about how some of these people do those things.
It's scary that people like that also make friends, that they get together and do things like that. It's just you could almost justify one person having like really sick thoughts and but then when they meet up together, it's just it really is scary,
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's the thing. I mean, you want to believe in the good in everybody, but as we keep moving through these years together as humans, and we keep reporting on these stories, that is why your mother tells you to call you when you get into the house. And it is why your mother tells you to lock the door behind you. It is, those are the reasons, because we know of the evil in the world, and you try to give your kids and your loved ones the, be cool, be careful. And I went up to Chico, and a good friend of mine, I went and spent the night at her house, and I went down, I said, are we going to go lock the door? She goes, oh, we don't lock the doors around here. I was like, oh, are you kidding? And I snuck downstairs and I locked all the doors before I went to bed. So yeah, it's one of those things that it's important to share. You try not to get yourself too freaked out by the bad in the world, but it's important to keep, as I say here in New York, when you're on the subway, eyes up.
So you mentioned locking the doors and shutting the drapes. Is there anything else that you do at your house all the time that maybe even like your husband or your kid are like, all right, mom, like relax. This isn't going to happen.
On the daily, as a matter of fact. No, I mean, I don't draw all, I don't pull all the drapes, but I'm mindful of it. I am mindful of that. And I do share, but I like having, and the thing that is terrible is I like having my shades open. I like looking at the twinkly lights across the street and the leaves as they turn color as the sun sets. And I do, I don't do it all the time, but I'm mindful of it. And not for nothing. That's the way the Yosemite case happened. Carol Sund and her daughters were in a motel room with their drapes open, and Carrie Stainer, the handyman, was walking around the parking lot, and he was looking in the windows to see if there were any women that he could see without men. He admitted to that. He told Ted Rollins of CNN, and that was part of his confession, is that's how he picked his victims. Like, he just walked around, and when the windows are open and whatever, and it's terrible. I don't want to live like that, but I want to be mindful of it as well. So I would say locking doors. We had our car broken into recently. I forgot to lock the door. Just lock the doors, pull the drapes. Be mindful of your surroundings. Those are most of the things that I harp on a lot.
My dad always taught us not to lock our car doors, because he said if anybody's going to want to come into your car, at least they won't break the window and you won't have to pay for that. But I'm like, but they'll steal your I don't know. That was always his theory. If you love this podcast, you are going to love The Gross Room. There are thousands of videos, posts, photos of all different things that have to do with pathology. Plus, there is no censorship, so we could talk about anything that we want to without having to have the limitations with social media. You can join now for only $5.99 a month, and this gives you access to all of the posts going back to 2019. Join thegrossroom.com today. The whole Idaho murder thing happened back in 2022. Mm-hmm. I was, of course, glued to that because it just was so bizarre, the circumstances surrounding it. And it was even more bizarre that it seemed that for almost over a month, they didn't have any suspects, although they did the entire time. We just didn't know about it. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, we were going to Florida during Christmas break to visit my father-in-law, and we were in the car, and I saw the news alert come through that said that they caught the suspect. And
Mhm.
there was a lapse of like a half hour before they actually posted a picture of him. And when I saw Brian Koberger's picture, I'm not lying to you, his eyes scared the shit out of me. There was
Mhm.
just something about him that I was like, "Oh my God," it bothered me so bad to the point where I actually had a hard time sleeping for the next 2 nights because it just was very scary to me. Have
Yeah.
you ever had a person that you've covered that you got that vibe from, or because I know you interview a lot of people associated with these cases too. Have you ever interviewed someone that really just like gave you the creeps or made you feel uneasy?
The one that I've recently interviewed was Fotis Doulos, and if you're familiar with that story, he was the estranged husband of a mother of five in New Canaan, Connecticut, Jennifer Doulos, whose body still today has not yet been found. He and I spent probably 13 hours together in his very upscale home in Connecticut, talking. Everybody thought he did it. That it seemed as though he was the most likely suspect. They were going through a horrible divorce, and I had been trying to get that interview, and I had hung out at the courthouse and lurked and lurked and lurked and tried to get him to talk to me, and I finally did, and we had a very long conversation. He was super standoffish in the beginning, but then warmed up. But I did talk to I mean, I sat from him, knee to knee. We were in his parlor, and we had this really long interview set up, and I asked him point blank to his face, and that was probably the first time that I've done that. I've yelled down when prisoners or suspects are coming in through the Sally Port when they're going into trial or going into a courtroom. I've been one of those reporters that yells out, why'd you do it, or what do you have to say for yourself? I've done that, but this is where it's just me and him, with our crew, face to face, eyeball to eyeball. And I said, did you have anything to do with Jennifer's disappearance? Just looking at him and watching him watch me. And we just kind of had this moment. And it was really disconcerting because he is very charming. Many people would describe him as a good looking man. And a lot of these cases, I should say, that I've covered are the unsuspecting, good looking man, right? You go back to Ted Bundy. I mean, that's the part of the boogeyman that is so scary, or the person that can snap and do something so horrific. I mean, Jennifer Doulos was attacked in the garage of her home and lost a lot of blood, and he is believed to have attacked her in a way that she lost almost all of her blood. So it's horrendous to think, when you look at somebody, like, how could you do that? Did you do that? What did you do? How did you get rid of the body? And that was what was going through my mind the whole time. And I'm talking, and I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, where you're talking to somebody and you hear yourself saying the words and you hear what they're saying, but your mind is going so fast because you know all the horrors of the story that you're talking about. And I just kept looking at him thinking, those hands that he's talking to, like as he's talking with his hands, are these the hands that strangled Jennifer, that stabbed her? Are these the hands that did that? As he's talking to me, and we're mostly talking about financial records, that's what's going through my mind. And then after we were done, he asked if he could make us dinner in his home. He said, "Let me make you some pasta." And I said, "I don't think, not today. Thank you." And then he called me on Christmas. I'd interviewed him just a few days before Christmas. He called me on Christmas and he wanted to know how I was doing. And I said, "How are you doing?" And then he said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Where are you?" And we had and he said, I just wanted to wish your family a Merry Christmas and tell you that I look forward to talking to you again when I can reveal more. And I said, "Okay." And then he killed himself the next month.
Wow.
So that was just crazy. I mean, he killed himself in the house that I had interviewed him at. So that one has really stuck with me.
Yeah, I could see why. I know how you feel though, because the first time I ever went to court with the medical examiner to watch, this is when I was a student. I went to watch the medical examiner testify.
Uh-huh.
It was a very surreal feeling to be in the room with someone that I know killed somebody. I
Mhm.
mean, it just, I kept staring at the guy and just thinking like, "Oh my God, this guy killed a human." It just was really different experience than listening to these stories, because you're seeing them in person and exactly thinking like the case that I was at was a manual strangulation case, and I did keep staring at his hands and saying like, this guy and his hands killed this woman, and her whole family was on the other side of the room crying, and it was just really surreal. So I understand that completely.
Yeah, it's and I've been experiencing that with Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer suspect, and I've been at all of his court appearances but one. And when he walks into the room, he's not just tall; he is a large human being, right? He's so big that it takes two sets of handcuffs to have him cuffed behind his back. They have to put one around one wrist, one around the other, and then they connect the two behind his back. That's how big he is. All of his victims were 100 pounds and maybe 5 feet on the average. So when I look at him and I think of that, and now we have this, shopping list and to-do list that he allegedly had on his hard drives, I just can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about what he did to them, how long he kept them alive, if true. Those are the things that you think about when you're in these courtrooms. And the victims' families are there, like you said. Like, you're looking at him, you're listening to the charges, you're looking over at the victims' family members, and the Gilgo case, they look back at us, and then you feel bad because you're there, but you're there doing your job, and you're not trying to stare. You're just trying to report who's in the courtroom and what the reaction is, because that's what people want to know. And that's what we're there to do. And, and maybe even get some more details out because maybe there's more victims in that case.
Yes. So do you want to tell everyone a little bit about, because you just recently did like a 5-part documentary on this case as well as a podcast series. Have you caught up to the more recent news of that there might be even more victims than originally thought?
I think that this is going to be one of the most prolific serial killer cases in our history. I think with the now charge of Sandra Castillo in 1993, that tells us a lot. I think that we are going to find out more. I mean, is it possible that this is it, the six? But I think that this is going to tell us that he may, I think there's some kind of a stat that serial killers on average start killing in their mid-20s. And the information that was found around Sandra Castillo tells us that he might have killed her when he was living with somebody else before his wife that we know now, Asa Ellerup. There were other people that were living in his home, and those fibers have been connected to that case. So that's 1993. So what was happening before that? And then when he was married to Asa, everything happened when she was out of town. And I said this on the air with Chris Cuomo the other night. I said, how many trips did she take? Like, I'm sure, now that I'm sure that, and the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office and the Gilgo Beach Homicide Task Force have done an incredible job, but I'm sure they're overlaying, the timeframes of the calendars of the family trips and the people missing and trying to figure out just how deep this is really going to go. But I think that many people covering the case believe that this is going to be a big one, even bigger.
One thing I think that is weird about this case is the whole aspect of his family living in the house. Do you think that there's something like, obviously the guy's a serial killer, so he's probably a total weirdo in real life aside from this
Right.
murdering thing he does on the side. So I could see being married to a person like that and then raising children when you're like that. They can be all a little odd too. I just think it wasn't even one of the cases that the wife's DNA was found on one of the girls' bodies, but I know that doesn't necessarily mean anything because if it was done in her home, her hair could have been around the house or whatever.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. They've actually kind of almost created, well, not almost, they did. They created a glossary in the last bail application for these two latest charges about what hair was with what victim, on what belt. There was a belt. But yeah, Asa Ellerup's hair believed to be is 99.9.6% possible that it's her hair, right? So they can't say with 100% certainty. They have to say that, but it matches her DNA. It matches her makeup. So, I mean, to think about what could have happened in the house, what happened to these victims, how they were kept alive, murdered, tortured, disposed of. And then it all comes down to one hair on each victim, one random hair. I mean, the hair on Jessica Taylor in Manorville was found underneath her body on a plastic sheet, on a surgical sheet, they said. So it was a piece of plastic and then this one little minuscule hair and then her remains. So my goodness, what steps were taken to conceal any evidence? A lot, right? But there was one hair that was missed. So we're gonna have to wait and see, but it's really dark stuff.
Yeah, it is. And I just think like that when I see the kids, how old they are, they're old. They look like they're, I don't know exactly how old they are, but they look like they're like in between 20 and 30 years old. I'm just like, you guys were living in the house with this going on and you didn't like, there's nothing that was abnormal about your living situation. Like, I would just really like to talk to them and just, what's a regular day? Do you go home? Do you guys eat dinner together? Like, what's happening in that house, you know?
I think a lot of people have that very question, and we've talked a lot to Robert Macedonio, who represents ASA. The adult children have a different lawyer, but they have all said the same thing, that they were completely unaware of what was going on. And we've heard this before with other serial killers, that they are living a double life, and some people are really good at it. Rex Heuermann was an architect. You know, he had critical thinking skills. He worked in the basement, and look, we've seen photos of the house. I've been in the house several times. We've seen some images of what the backyard looks like. Dad's workshop. I mean, if you've got a messy basement, if you're a kid, I don't think you're going down there a lot to look at what's down there. Maybe he kept them out. Not really sure. Maybe he said, I've got my guns down there. We know that he had almost 300 guns. So why that was, we still don't know. But I don't know the answer to that. I'm in line right there with you. I would love to talk to them individually and find out what they could tell us. I can tell you that from talking to Bob Macedonio, the attorney, that they are completely traumatized. I mean, they just got moved back in, and remember, the first time they did the raid in July of last year, they were cutting out pipes, they were taking out the tub, they were taking apart the mattress, they were ripping up the floorboards, and then they left. And then the family has to go back there, and people are like, why don't they go somewhere else? I think they don't have anywhere else to go, number one. But a lot of people say, well, I would get a hotel or whatever, but things get expensive quickly, and then there goes your primary caregiver for money. So there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot we don't know or understand. But it's my understanding that just before this second raid happened last month, that they were just getting kind of the knickknacks back in order upstairs, that they were just kind of starting to get everything back together. They've just done some not remodeling, but I don't know, changed out a rug, got a different bed, whatever it was. They were just getting things settled, and then knock, knock. And here is the task force again, and off they go. But they primarily did their work in the basement. That we know, that most of what was upstairs was not touched. And that a lot of that search concentrated on the basement. And it's, from what we've heard, they were taking down wall panelings. They were taking ceiling parts. They were looking for push pin holes for the plastic drapes that he was using. Pretty brutal stuff.
Yeah, it is really a mind-blowing case to think that this has been happening all these years. And I mean, thank God for DNA, right? I think we always say that there's two groups of people. There's people that murdered people, and then people that had children with one guy, right, and told another guy that it was their baby or something. All these dirty secrets are going to start coming out over the next, 20 years or so, that people thought that they were getting away with,
That's right. And that's the crazy thing about all of this. And when I went to Massapequa Park, the several times I've been there, and I live on Long Island, there's so many homes that are so nice. And then you've seen the pictures. The home is, doesn't look like the rest. And it's just, people are traumatized, and it's not, what else I think about? I wanted to bring up with you. Not only the family members, the neighbors, but you know what I think about? I think about the people that find the victims and what that does to
Oh,
their
yeah.
lives. I think about the people that went for a walk on a trail and found Jessica Taylor and Sandra Castile. We know how the Gilgo victims were found from a search. But what about the person who went to go walk their dog in the Bay Area and found the remains of Lacey Peterson? And what about the other dog walker that went on a walk on the rocky shoreline of a beautiful day? It's beautiful in San Francisco, as we know, and found the remains of Connor Peterson, an unborn baby that was found the way he was. I mean, those stories, those lives that are forever affected. Talk about not being able to turn it off when you're going to bed. And those are the images that you see. Those are the images that you see, that those
Yeah, I mean,
people, those people are victims too.
yeah, I mean, I've said that forever, just seeing these, when you're trained and you see bodies at the medical exam where you see dead people all the time, but but for regular people that just go to work and they're just like working an office job and they've never seen a dead body besides maybe like a family member at a viewing that was covered in makeup and looked alive still, like they were sleeping. Just for any regular person to see something like that and unexpectedly, I can't imagine the trauma that causes for life. I don't know
Yeah,
how you get rid of that.
I don't know how either. I really don't.
So we met at CrimeCon, and you said, "Oh," I said, "When are you doing your presentation?" And you said Sunday. I think it was at like 2:00. And of course, I had to leave because of my kids, right?
Mhm.
Because I left them for 3 days and I felt guilty. So
Right.
you were doing your lecture, and I didn't miss it. And then I found out that you were doing it with Mark Garagos and that Lyle Menendez called during it. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I was kind of regretting going home from my kids at that point. But
Aw.
what what'd you think about how did that call go? Because it seemed like it got a lot of news coverage. And did you know that he was going to be calling, or was that kind of some like impromptu thing that happened? It was really a great idea to spread awareness for this case, for sure.
So we had the session booked with Mark Garagos. I originally had pitched at CrimeCon I wanted to have the fire investigator who had written the report about the orange van in the Scott Peterson case. And we were going to have a detective, and we had a different setup. Then Mark Garagos became available, and they decided that we should have a conversation with Mark Garagos because he could talk about Scott Peterson, and he could also talk about Lyle and Eric Menendez, which of course there's traction now in that case, that long running case with two new pieces of evidence that is being looked into to possibly have the brothers resentenced and possibly released, which is a huge deal. And as we were getting closer to CrimeCon in Nashville, Mark Garagos is of course a huge name and long-running criminal defense attorney with many clients. And I had posted on X that, hey, looking forward to seeing you guys at CrimeCon. We're going to have Mark Garagos. See you there on Sunday. And then he reposted that and said, and we may have a special guest along with the special Laura Ingle. And I thought, okay, do we need to order another chair to be on the stage? What are we talking about, Mark? And then there was rumors that, somebody was maybe it would be a phone call. And at first I thought, well, it might be a family member. Like, I didn't think for a minute it was going to be anybody from prison. And then it became kind of clear that it was going to be someone from prison, but Mark wouldn't tell me who it was. And I said to Mark, I said, look, I've been covering Scott Peterson, as you well know, from me being in the courtroom when you were in the courtroom for over 20 years. So if it's going to be Scott Peterson, I want to know. And he said, I can't tell you until I get it confirmed. So we're at CrimeCon. I had just met you. I'm backstage, and these poor audio guys at CrimeCon, because we're all backstage. And I started filming, and I'm going to share that video in due time. I'm going to share the video of what happened backstage because it was crazy. He didn't tell me until we were walking up the dark steps to the backstage area, until we were up there, and he was on his phone and they were doing a practice call. And I could hear somebody talking, and I will share this video because it's crazy. And that is when I found out that it was going to be Lyle Menendez. And we were working on how is this going to time out, because I had this whole presentation ready with a PowerPoint of Scott Peterson and all the pictures about the case. Then I had pictures of Lyle Menendez and Eric Menendez and that, and we had it timed. And as you know from these CrimeCon sessions, you have to, kind of work within a perimeter of time, and you have to allow for questions. And you think that an hour seems like such a long time, then all of a sudden they're counting you down. You've got 2 minutes left. So we're backstage, and Mark says, Lyle Menendez, meet Laura Ingle on the speakerphone. I said, hi, Lyle. I guess we're doing this. And the audio guys were backstage, and they go, we are 5 minutes to going out on stage. And the audio techs were going, do we have time to patch this through? How are we going to do this? And the decision was made right then and there. The only thing that was going to happen was that Lyle Menendez was going to call collect from prison. Mark was going to put it on speakerphone, and he was going to hold it up to the microphone that he was wearing. And that was the only way that was going to happen. And that is exactly what happened.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was wondering that because I know behind the scenes there's they would probably be able to play it over the speaker system if they had adequate notice and everything. So yeah. That's cool. But I'm glad that I'm very interested in this case because I feel like these guys have already been in jail way too long. It's almost like Maria and I were saying that we think it's kind of like the Gypsy Rose case, like that she finally killed her mom because she was just abusing her so bad. And we see how that worked out, that she did some crime. She did some time she didn't, I guess her boyfriend had killed her mom, but she was involved with it. But now she's free, and she should be because of the abuse she suffered throughout her life. And it's the same thing with the Menendez brothers, in my opinion. And I hope to God they get a new trial and get a second chance at life. And even if, they're older now, right? Most of their adult life has been in jail, but at least maybe they could really change things for people moving forward.
Oh, that's what Lyle talked about. And when the call came, I just want to tell your viewers that it was, there was a gasp in the crowd. I could hear it from the stage, and my friends that were out in the audience, you could hear when they say, Mark Garrigo said, ladies and gentlemen, this is Lyle Menendez on the phone. And everybody was shocked, myself included. I knew it was going to happen moments before, but still, I was like, I can't believe this is happening. And what he talked about was, in the moment, and I had no time to prepare and then I later thought, should I have talked to him about what happened that night and pulling the trigger, and was thinking about all the things. But what I ended up asking him was, what do you plan to do? He talked about the work that he's been doing, being productive in prison, that he's been helping other inmates, that he has been working on. He's been talking to Rosie O'Donnell, of all people, about establishing a foundation to help childhood sexual abuse survivors. And then June 20th, he is planning on graduating with a bachelor's degree in sociology, along with 23 other inmates. So he was talking about the work he's been doing, the work the education that he's been able to get while in prison, and then what he wants to do and become a productive member of society. And he thanked people for the support, those that have supported him. And remember, there's a lot of people out there who think that, life in prison without parole means life in prison without parole, period, end of discussion. So we'll see what happens next, but it's a really fascinating turn in this case because there's two new things that have happened with a member of that boy band Menudo that had come forward to talk about the abuse he says he suffered at the hands of Jose Menendez years ago when he was 14. And then this letter that was discovered that was written to a cousin. Lyle Menendez had written to a cousin talking about the abuse he suffered from his father. The cousin recently died, and when they went through his things, they found this letter. So we'll see what happens with the judge. It's now in a judge's hands to decide what's going to happen next. But it's definitely, this is one of the first, if you want to call it, true crime cases that people had really started following with the trials of these two brothers. So a lot of people have an investment in following the story, and we'll see what happens next. But there could be a big turn coming with this.
Yeah, and the whole thing is just, it's really sick. And I wrote a high profile death dissection. I actually did 2 parts on it. So really did a deep dive into it. And I I felt really terrible that it just was like, oh, well, there's no proof that the dad did this. And it's like, well, of course, like that's what these people do. Pedophiles don't usually keep proof of it unless they have videos or something in their house nowadays. But back in, I mean, this crime happened in the 90s and they were children in the 80s. So, or even late 70s or 80s, right? So it's like, of course, there's no proof that he molested the children. And it's
Right.
sad that they even have to get additional information from these boy band members and not
Mhm.
believe these kids. And also, in the first trial, I remember that the prosecutor said something like, oh, they couldn't have been raped because they lacked the adequate parts to be raped or something like that. And I mean, it's awesome that they'll at least be able to be these pivotal people of these types of cases, hopefully when they get out. And I mean, the years of suffering of being in prison on top of all the suffering that they did is just, it pisses me off and makes me upset, like as a mom, you know what I mean? And like a
Yeah.
person that loves children, you know?
In the interviews, just people that have said, well, they were adults, they could have left. And that really upsets me too, to hear that, because we don't know what was going on. There was a lot of, manipulation going on emotionally, psychologically. But just for those people, I wish that they would take a step back and look at, maybe the larger picture of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. So over the past hour or so, we've been talking about really horrible stuff. I love that you do make light of some of this because these subjects are very heavy, like your baseball car story. And
Yes.
because when you hear about all this horrible stuff all the time, you have to make jokes from time to time. But are there any news stories that you report on that have been happy, that make people feel good?
Um, well, yes, there has. I've done a lot of entertainment reporting. I've done some lighter side stuff. I mean, back to my radio days, I've done a lot of great things that, race car driving and county fairs and that sort of thing. I'd say probably my number one story. People have asked me, like, what's your favorite story? And it's hard. You can't say that a murder trial is your favorite story, because those stories are awful. But the one story that still stays with me today because I'm in touch with them, I did a story about and went on tour with Iron Maiden. I mentioned that I'm a former
Oh,
rock
that's cool.
DJ. I did a story about them and how the lead singer, Bruce Dickinson, is not only a trained opera singer, but he's also this showman that everybody knows about running around on stage. But he's also a pilot, licensed commercial pilot. And so they found a way to tour around the world in a custom jet that they had made, the 737. And they had painted the outside and they had cleared out the back of the plane to put their huge stage show, put the band in business class, the crew and coach, and then Bruce Dickinson, the pilot, flew the plane, and I went on the plane with them to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we did a couple stops, and I got to tell that story. And that was, as a long-standing Iron Maiden fan from my childhood, that was pretty fun.
That's so cool. Like, what a cool experience.
Yeah, yeah, that was a top highlight for sure.
I love that. Well, just wrapping up, like we're trying to talk to these about these different careers with women and stuff, and for sure your job sounds so cool and appealing to many people, I'm sure. But being a woman like I am too, it's like you're a wife and you're a mom, you got to cook dinner, all this stuff. So you said you had an 11-year-old son. What what kind of struggles did you have in this job, just because you kind of always have to be on call in a way in case there's any breaking news and you have to travel? Is that something, like, how do you balance your life with your family and your career?
Well, it's challenging. It's not easy. And everything, when I think people see what we do on television, it looks like it might be easy doing hair and makeup, researching, writing a script, getting information, and all of that takes time, and it takes time away from your family. There's commuting, there's, as you mentioned, traveling to different jurisdictions for the story, and of course, for me, trying to shield him as much as I can from the content. And that is unavoidable sometimes because, like, when I went to Wyoming, I was with Gabby Petito's family when she was found. I mean, I wasn't at the physical place, but we were right down the road when Jim Schmidt, her stepfather, who was there searching for her, got the phone call from the FBI. And so the Gabby Petito conversation is one that my son has overheard in my house. He's who's Gabby Petito? Well, you know, you have to explain that in a way that is sensitive. Um, and he understands that mommy works with, he talks to the FBI and talks to the police. And I did a story with the U.S. Marshals. I went out on a violent fugitive task force ride along, and he heard about that in the background. So it's very, you've got to be careful about it. But he also needs to understand that I have an important job. But I always tell them that I'm out with the good guys trying to get the bad guys. So it is definitely a balance, and it's really hard a lot of the times to pull myself back, especially when news is breaking after hours and I'm home and I want to be on social and I want to be talking to figuring out how we're going to do this the next day. But I also want to be a mom, and I just have to check myself, and really try and pull myself back when and where I can, send a quick text or a note when and where I can, and be as present, because I know I'm going to blink and he's going to be a teenager any second.
I know. I think that it's good though that you talk about that, because I think it's like something a lot of women struggle with, especially like my husband also kind of wants to do a lot of stuff with his life. He doesn't really want to be like a mom dad, which is what I
Yeah,
say is like, okay, the guy that'll be there to like cover for you if you're doing something, you know?
right.
So it's something that you have to go into knowing that you're trying to do all these things, but you still want to be like the best mom to your kid as well, you know?
It's the number one job, and being a wife too. My husband, who is just amazing, and I don't think he was with me when I met you, but he was with me at CrimeCon, and he is just a fantastic partner. And we actually met on the job. We met working on the Geraldo Rivera show years and years ago. That's how we met. And he's a professional drummer,
Oh, that's
so
cool.
we've got music and news in the blood, for both of us. And he has been very active in helping me with my career as well. And he does a lot of behind the scenes production stuff, and he'll be helping with the podcast that will be coming out. And, it's a balance though. I don't remember and we just talked about this the other night. Like, when was the last time we went on a date? We need to make sure to make time for that, because it's just like, let me just get past CrimeCon. Let me just get past, Rex Heuermann's back in court. Let me just get past this ISIS thing that's happening today, which I have to go and report on right now, as a matter of fact. So, it's just, you just have to carve out time. I need to be better about that. It's something that I'm working on, just as a human, as a wife, and as a mom.
Yeah, we do stupid stuff like when we have to go pick up the kids from school, like we'll go together just because it's a 15-minute ride in the car alone. So it's just like, and that's multiple times a week. So it's just kind of like, even if we don't have time to go on dates, it's just like catch up time to talk, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of
Yeah.
pathetic.
No, but it's not. But that's the way of the world these days, and that's how, when we're all working as hard as we are right now, I think that that's great. I think that it may sound like 15 minutes doesn't sound like a long time, but it can be. You can get a lot covered in 15 minutes, and a lot of it's a thing that we all talk about in the news industry, of just how to make that time. Because I don't know what it is, man. It's just, there is so much news. It's like a fire hose every single day. It doesn't stop. And I said something out loud the other day to somebody. I said, I want to get to a point soon where I can hear myself stop saying this phrase: let me just get past ... Let me just get past this, whatever it is. And then I can go on that vacation, or then I can go, sit at the beach for a second and not be working. Let me just get past, pick the story. And I want to find a place for that someday soon. Maybe tomorrow. We'll see.
No, I totally get it, because I was the same way. Like, and it sucks too, because it's not only my family, but it's like my friends too. I'll just be like, listen, I have to do CrimeCon, so the whole world has to be stopped for while I write
Hey.
my lecture and mentally prepare for this, and I'll be available after, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's important. We all have to make the time, and it's just, we got to prioritize it. That's all.
I'm going to let you go right now. Just let us know if you're working on any other projects you want anybody to know about.
I will. I will. I've been trying to post more behind the scenes stuff on X and on my Instagram page, which I had to completely redo and restart because I was confused for another Laura in the business. And so I had to take down my original. I had to move my stuff private and start all over again. So I encourage people to follow me on Instagram at Laura Ingle TV and on X at Laura Ingle, and that's Ingle with an I. So I'd appreciate that, just because I do try and post as much behind the scenes. And I know that that's what people really want to see, because that's what I want to see. I want to see what happens behind the camera, what happens in the courtroom hallways, what happens on the investigations that we go on. So I try to post a lot of that stuff on social.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was really awesome. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our next chat.
Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor, and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology, so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day, and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks.